Hello.
Hi.
How's it going?
It's going.
Hey, Steve.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon. How are you?
I'm better.
Good. Glad to hear it. You had a rough time of it, didn't you?
I did. They said it was called long-term COVID. It's a month.
Just a clarification, the induction candidate should be here too, along with the mentors?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. All right. This is our MIC presentation training for March of 2021. And if you haven't already, we'd ask that you open the sign-in sheet from your Google Classroom. If you can't find it, as a couple of you have placed it in the chat. And if you would sign in, that would be. All right, let me go to here. A couple of things that you should know before we start talking about the presentation. The first is that our presentation is going to be due on May 9th. And it's a little unique. May 9th is a Sunday. I normally don't like to put an assignment's due date on a Sunday because then it means that people are working over the weekend. But in this case, I would normally have had it assigned for a Friday, but I know that nobody would look at those videos until the following week. So I thought that I would give you the extra time and make it due on Sunday, May 9th. We want you to keep your video between 15 and 20 minutes. I don't think ever had a video that was shorter than 15 minutes. People find that 20 minutes is hard to cram all of the information in. We frequently have videos that are longer than 20 minutes. And if you're 21 and a half or something like that, will probably be fine. But much more than that, it causes a log jam as we're trying to review with a small team of people all of the videos that we're going to be recording in 2 days. And so if yours goes longer, it starts to back up and impact everybody's schedule. And so if it's significantly longer than there's a real good chance that we'll ask you to put it in under the time frame. So you have 15 to 20 minutes doing your presentation. You can enhance your presentation if you wanted to put color in there or animation, if you want to make it spin and come in backwards or whatever it is that you like to do. You're more than welcome to do that. But keep in mind that it will not enhance your grade. We're not grading you on your ability to put the presentation together. We assume you already know how to do that. What we are looking for is the content, okay? The results of your submission will either be met standards or didn't meet. And really what we say is there was sufficient evidence or not enough evidence of teacher growth. And if you met the requirements according to our panel, then we'll either move you to second year or recommend you for your clear credentials. So this will be your last step in the program for this year. If it comes back that there was not enough evidence of teacher growth, we have a 3-tiered reaction to that. And the first one, which is the most common, is that I'll give you a call or we'll figure out a time when we can talk with each other on the phone. And I'll ask a few questions and find the information that was missing. And once I get that and I'm satisfied, then we'll move you on as complete. And you'll either get your credential or move into a second year. The second tier is there may be a slide that we want you to edit. Maybe there was some missing data or some clarity that we needed. And so I may have you redo a slide or insert a slide and then email it to me once you have completed that. And both of those steps are pretty common. The third step is very rare. And I want to think that just in very few cases, we would ask you to actually redo the presentation. And I'm talking about, it's like 1%. It's very small. But the bottom line is that we are not going to deny you the ability to get your credential. What we're just going to do is ask you to meet the standard. And so we'll keep working with you until that that happens. Okay. Any questions about that so far? Okay. The data that we're going to be talking about that we want in your presentation comes from your journals. It's imperative that your journals are up to date and you have access to them. And so as I talk about data and things that demonstrate, it should all be from your journal. And if you've done your journals well, putting the presentation together is not a huge ordeal. If you've tried to cut corners on your journal, then putting the presentation is where it shows the most. And you may struggle with that. We would advise you, even though you're doing a recording, to practice your presentation before you record it, especially given the time constraints, and you'll figure out what you need to add or subtract to make sure that it fits in that time frame. So practice and then record. It'll save you some time and effort. And we would like for you to use Zoom as the way to record your video. In fact, we would like for you to open your Zoom with the presentation in it and then share your screen so that we can see your presentation and see you at the same time. Some of us have asked, can we use other media for recording the video? And my recommendation is no, because I don't want any software issues when we come to opening your video. If you do use something like Screencast or Google Meets or something like that, would you please convert it into a YouTube video and then submit that as a YouTube? But the easiest way is to just use Zoom, because we all have an account to use Zoom. If you don't have a Zoom account, they're free and part of the Google, not part of Google, but they are a free source for you to create your video with. Let me show you what we're talking about.
Hello, my name is Ashley Martinez, and this is my end of the year presentation for MIC. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with you guys. Again, my name is Ashley Martinez. I am an ELD teacher at Madera South. I studied at Fresno State. I earned my bachelor's and my teaching credential through Fresno State. I was born and raised in Madera. I then was an after-school program tutor for about 3 years with California Teaching Fellows. I student taught at Rio Vista Middle School for 6 months. I was also an ELA teacher at Fireball Middle School for 2 years. And this past year, I've been one of the ELD teachers at Madera South.
Okay. So that should give you an idea of what we're looking for. You'll notice that they called up their presentation and then shared their screen. And so she has the picture of herself and the presentation right there in the middle. Any questions about that? And if you have a question, shout it out. I will tell you that I have a hard time multitasking. And so if you're putting a question in the chat, I probably won't see it until the end of our meeting. So when I invite you to ask a question, just unmute yourself and holler away, and we'll hear your question and answer.
I have a question. when we're watching this sample, sorry, I don't know enough about Zoom as far as adding the presentation. Am I going to be actually live and then sharing my screen with you and the board presenting my piece, or is the whole thing a recording
The
that
whole
you're going
thing.
to view at your leisure?
Yeah, the whole thing's a recording. It would be a logistical nightmare to try to schedule everybody for a live presentation, and it would take weeks to get through everybody in that sense. So the best thing to do is to record it and share it with us, and then what we do is sit through a whole day of just watching videos. Although with our classes getting back into shape, we may have to. We'll probably have multiple school of looking at videos, but anyway, that's the point, is that we do it at our convenience rather than time with you. Good question.
Do we have access to that sample video?
No,
Okay.
because I didn't ask the teacher if we could share it. So I figured I could share as much as production without embarrassing her. But I suppose I could go back and ask her, but I didn't. I haven't yet, and I didn't want to embarrass her any more than if she finds out I shared just the introduction, she might get mad. So.
Steve, this is Melissa Coddington. I'm a mentor, and I was wondering if you are calling mentors to be a part of the viewing of the videos this time around.
The answer is no. And that's a great point as we talk about Zoom. While we're still opening up our schools, there's still a ton of protocols in place about mixing with people and extended time with people. And so for the interest of logistics, I'm going to bring in a small team and we're all going to do it together in one day. So you don't have to come in this year to watch the videos.
Steve, hi, this is Halima again. For those of us who are not as familiar as far as loading a video to Zoom, are you going to have like a simple instruction sheet for dummies that you could send out so people like me can access it?
Sure, I can do that.
Thank you very much.
I got to write it down though, because I'm getting old and I'm going to forget. Okay, good. Any other questions?
I have a question.
I'm listening.
Hi, I love that sample video, and I would love to see a small portion of it now or later of her, presenting evidence instead of just the intro, to just kind of see how that connects. Is that something you're able to do?
I have to ask the teacher if it's okay to share it.
For sure.
And as soon as if I get a yes, I'll share that with you. If not, I'll ask some other teachers.
Thank you.
Do that. Okay. In your classroom, in both the mentors and the induction candidates, you have this document, and it is the sample for the presentation. In your assignments for induction candidates, you also have the template, and let me show you the difference. Can you see this one where my mouse is?
Yes.
So this is the template. Notice that it has brackets. So here's the brackets that I'm talking about. Actually, let me see if I opened up the right one. Hold on just for a moment. Just give me a second here. Oop. Sorry about that. I opened up a previous version and make sure that you got the right one. All right, let's share the screen again. So here are the brackets that we were talking about. This is the template that I want you to fill in. What I would like you to do is actually, once you see where it says, for instance, your site, is to take that out and write in your site. Just like that. So you don't need to use the, leave the brackets in there or the description of what I want. Just erase that part and put in what pertains to you.
And that would be something that the candidates are doing, right?
That's correct. Absolutely correct. Okay.
Do make sure you review it for them before they record themselves, though. Don't, like go through it with them before they make their recording. So if they need to update anything, or if you're not happy, or you think something could be more solid, they get some feedback.
Great point, Nancy. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so here's my sample. I'm in my presentation, I'm covering standards 1 and 2, and we take the time to introduce ourselves. And so we want you to tell us your name, what school you're teaching at, subject or grade level, where you got your credential, and what credential you're working on. And then this is the background. And what we want you to do is help your reviewers understand who you are and the context of your teaching assignment and progress towards your credential. So you notice on mine, I say that I was born and raised in Madera, went to Madera Unified Schools. In fact, I went to a preschool that some of you have never heard of, called Small Fry. It's out by Howard School now. But at the time, I'm so old that when I went there, it's where the old ag farm used to be at Madera High School, behind the athletic field where the JV baseball and the softball fields are now. That used to be Small Fry Nursery School. And then I went to John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, and I am a Coyote through and through. Not only did I go to school there, but I ended up even teaching there. In fact, I won't embarrass him, but one of my teachers is now a mentor and with us here today. All right, so I mentioned that I was born in Madera, trying to give some context to the fact that I understand the culture of Madera. So I was a substitute teacher. And then I mentioned pastor for 15 years. That seems kind of odd. Why would I mention that in a credentialing presentation? But it felt important to me as I was presenting who I am to explain to the panel that I have experience working with high school students. In fact, I was a youth pastor for 15 years before I became a teacher. So I had a lot of experience with kids. And I'll explain a little bit more as I get into the sample of why that's part of my context. If you have a context, even if it's not being a teacher, please share that. We had once, one of our candidates had been a manager of Walmart for a number of years. And so he understood how to manage people, and that was part of his presentation. And then tell us where you did your student teaching. And I really did do my student teaching in the grant. Okay, and so we switched it up a little bit. Now I'll show you year 2. We want you to spell out the standards that you're covering. And please don't just reference it and say standard 1, but actually write out the standard. And the reason is that our readers, and I'm sure you even, don't have all 6 standards memorized. So it's important that you spell that out for us. And when are you making your presentation? You'll notice that, whoops, we say the spring of 21. Then we want you to do something a little unique. We want you to begin your story. So this whole presentation is a story about you and your teacher growth. And so this slide and the next slide begin to kind of start the story. Where were you as a teacher when the year started? And how have you grown as a teacher since now? Here we are almost into April. And I'm sure many of you will have a similar introduction to this year. You were faced with long distance learning and it was a mess and you were lost, and so is your mentor, and so is your administrator, and so is your district, and so is the state, and we can go on, and that's okay if that's what you want to share. But tell us about where you're at in your teaching practice, and particularly what are some areas that you were concentrating on as growth? What did you want to get better at? So in this slide, while it's not identified, really relates to my first goal. And this slide really relates to my second goal, okay? So I'll go back there for just a second. Yep. In the fall, I realized my students struggle with critical thinking. I didn't know what to do about that. And having never taught it really before, I didn't know how to impart that skill. Today, I'm well on the path of understanding how to develop reasoning and critical thinking student skills in my students, okay? All right, on your template and here in the sample, it says individual learning plan and there's no brackets. I would like for you to basically just leave this slide alone. Now, of course, if you're one of our more ambitious teachers who likes to decorate everything and make everything really look sharp, and you want to add color and movement, that's fine. But there's no content needed on this slide. And then it's delineated that way in the template without any bracket. So anytime you don't see brackets, leave it alone. All right. Again, the same thing. It's telling us that this is goal 1. And in the template, there are no brackets on this one, so leave this slide alone as well. Okay, so this relates to goal number 1. And you'll notice that we, oops, got it, included the standard. And now we're, for the first time, adding the element and the goal. And what's interesting is that the goal is written in past tense. My goal is to improve my ability. And the reason that it's in past tense is that now we have accomplished our goal, right? When we wrote it on the ILP, this was something we wanted to do. Now we're writing it on the presentation. This is something that I did. Excuse me. Okay. Standard, the element, and then your goal. The next step, just like on your ILP, are your pathways. Now, you probably have multiple, well, you should have, because our standard asks for multiple pathways on your ILP. I don't want you to include all of your pathways on your presentation, okay? What I want you to do are pick the one that really moved the needle on your teaching experience, what really gave you insight into growth as a teacher. We call it the ESPN highlights, okay? Give us the highlights. But I will say this, we are still for multiple pathways. Didn't define that with a number and we did it deliberately, okay? We didn't want to say 4 when 3 for you was sufficient. If you're like me and I said, well, these 3 really meant a lot, but I don't know what else to do to tell you, oh, well, I'll just find one that checks the box and I'll throw it in there. But on the other hand, maybe there was 5. As you see on my sample, there's 5 that I listed. If we said 4, the temptation would be to only place 4, even though 5 of them really meant a lot to you. So we define the standard as multiple pathways, which in our definition means more than 2, okay? And you'll find those right on your ILP, and the data and how that you implemented it should come right out of your journal. Notice on my pathway that I put dates. When I did these things, I want to make sure that it's this year, okay? So dates are important on your presentation because it tells us that your action research or your pathways were concurrent with your goal. All right, any questions so far? Fantastic. I know that's not the true way to check for understanding, but we've got 100 people here today, so here we go. All right, so you list your pathways, and this is what's interesting. Tell us how your pathways worked, okay? You talked to your peers, you did some research on the internet, you went to a seminar, you examined some student work that informed your teaching. What did you do with that information? And so I wrote a list, okay? You don't need to put 8 things. You just need to put things that make sense to you that demonstrate your growth, all right? This is an example of what I thought about that would have moved the growth in my case. All of this relates back to my pathway. The third thing is your measurable outcome. How did you gather their information, okay? Or what did you do with it? And this is where you write your goal, the outcome, sorry, not the goal, the outcome of your goal. My students will be able to write a critical analysis essay on the conflicts found in the plot of a short story. 85% of my students will improve 25% on their summative assessment as graded by the rubric. Okay, a couple of thoughts about this slide. The first is that it's going to ask you to write the goal again. You don't have to read it to us as you get to this slide. This is so that the readers or the reviewers can reflect back on the goal, because we're all getting old and we have short-term memory loss. And so it's great to be able to, especially after we've reviewed 14 of these, to sit and be able to look at your slide and remember what your goal was about, okay? Another note is I said in my goal that I wanted to improve 25% as it's graded on a rubric. When I initially wrote this, I said that I wanted my class to jump 2 columns on the rubric. And then I did the math and found that it was impossible. It just didn't work that way, especially if you had a number of students that were already in the 4th column. They can't grow anymore, they're already stuck there. So I changed it to a percentage. So this brings me to another point. And I want to remind you that your individual learning plan, your ILP, is a live document. And even at this late date, if you need to edit the goal to make more sense because you now compiled the data and the data is great and it shows growth, but it doesn't jive quite with what your goal was, as in my case where I changed it from 2 columns to a percentage, you absolutely have the ability to change that and edit it, okay? You can do that. It's a live document. What we want this to do is make sense to you first so that you can make sense to us and show us through your students' outcomes how you have grown as a teacher. Any questions about that? Okay, I'm going to move on.
Actually, Steve, this is Halima again. That's good to know because I was of the understanding that it was that you couldn't, once it was in place after Christmas, you weren't allowed to alter or change or gravitate that goal, and it made it difficult. So that's good to know. Thanks.
And there is a reason why we said that. The essence of the goal at this point probably needs to, the outcome needs to stay the same. But if you wanted to edit it that it made more sense, or if you wanted to change the numbers or something of that nature, or change like I did in 2 columns to a percentage. But if you went with a brand new goal and and a data outcome now, it would be really a challenge, a huge challenge.
No, the editing part, yes, thanks.
Yeah, you absolutely can. And there was a March update that we had due a couple of weeks ago that would have allowed, certainly prompted people to make any edit changes at that point. Although most of you probably added more pathways as your update, which is fine, which is kind of the purpose. Yes, this is a live document and those changes can still be made.
I'm sorry, I do have a question.
Yes.
So if we do edit it, we don't need to get additional signatures. We can just edit the document.
That's correct.
Okay.
And you might tell us that in your presentation. Hey, I did the numbers and it made more sense. So I will let you know that I changed it to reflect clarity and to make it easier for everybody to understand. All right.
Steve, I have a question.
Yes.
When will do we have access to what you're on right now, this template? Have you already sent it to us, or where can I find that?
Yes, it's in the classroom under the assignment for induction candidates. It's in the assignment. And it's under presentation video. There's a number of documents there.
Perfect.
In fact, I included the rubric, and I'm going to encourage you a little bit to review the rubric so you know exactly what we're looking for. There's a sheet of directions on there. There is the template and there is the sample. The template is in the assignment category. It's unique to you. The sample is viewed by everybody. And I believe I put both documents in the mentor classroom as well, so that mentors can view it, but they can't edit it unless they make a copy and go from there.
Thank you.
Yep. Does everybody see that in their classroom?
I found it.
Okay. Very good. And by the way, I did, and some of you were confused, add last night's video of tonight's presentation training in the classroom. And that's because we had a major technical issue on Tuesday night. For whatever reason, the security settings were changed that I didn't know, and it wouldn't allow any of my county participating teachers to jump in. They were blocked, and despite my best efforts, I couldn't unchange that. And so we had another meeting for them last night. But it also caused me to be really flustered, and the whole night was an absolute disaster. So I recorded it last night and dumped it in there. I had a couple of teachers asking for it because they were meeting tomorrow and wanted to be able to discuss it. So I apologize if that caused any confusion. Normally I would have put it in the classroom tomorrow after our meeting tonight, but I jumped the gun a little bit because, well, Tuesday was a disaster. So, and I'm still embarrassed about that one. All right. Measurable outcome. And now we get to the data. We want to know how you collected your data, and you should tell us that you gave a pre-assessment and a summative assessment, or a pre-assessment and a series of summative assessments. And if you remember, we asked you and wrote it down that you should have 3 focus students that you're looking at, if possible, although it's not always possible. One of them was an EL student. One of them was a special ed student, and one of your own choosing. I've given you an example today, and I included first and last names as a way to be a little humorous. And if you know anything about baseball, you'll know that Davey Lopes was a second baseman for the Dodgers in the 70s, and Steve, a second baseman for the Dodgers in the 80s. You see a theme here. And Clayton Kershaw, who is current a Dodger. Now, I will tell you that my wife is a Giant fan, and I've been buying all kinds of World Series memorabilia. And the other day I got another mask, and so I have to show it to you. The World Series Los Angeles Dodgers with all their signatures on there. And what I told her was, it may be the last time in my lifetime I get to celebrate, so I'm going to do it right. And she smiled at that. As a Giant fan, she appreciated that. So I bring that up as a way of being a little humorous, but also to make this point. We do not want to see first and last names on your presentation. We would ask that you hide your identity of your students a little bit. So either a first name or a last name or a student ID. The only reason that it's 2 names in my sample is because I wanted to be a little funny. Okay? And I don't see anybody laughing, so maybe it didn't work.
Tee hee hee.
All right. So how did I get my data? I had a pre and a post, and I picked 3 focus students. Here is my data. The first thing I included, and I even put a hyperlink to this in my pathway, was a rubric. That does not mean that you have any of the data I'm going to show you does not mean that you have to use what I'm using. We want you to show the data that makes sense to you. But because as I was going through this and putting this together, what was on the rubric was central to what I was going to be teaching throughout the year on critical thinking. It was imperative, I thought, in this presentation that I include the rubric, okay? And later on, you'll see actual assignments that come right off of the rubric. That may not make sense for you. And so you'll find other ways to put your data together. I also used exclusively bar graphs. Why did I use bar graphs? Because I was making this up out of thin air and it was the easiest thing for me to do. I actually created a spreadsheet and mocked up grades for all the assignments and for the summative the pre and the summative assessments, and bar graphs made the most sense to me. It may not make the most sense to you. So choose your data, and the criteria is it has to make sense to you, but it needs to show all class, the whole class, a pre-assessment and summative assessment, and data for your focus students. There's one more thing I want you to include this year. I would like, if possible, for you to show me student work, okay? So as you're thinking about how you worked your pathway and some of the things that you tried, and then the students did an assignment, show us some examples of that. If you want to show a short video clip, if you want to take pictures of artwork, if you
Can I ask a question?
yes.
What if we have like Google Forms? Could we show like, you know how if you show a summary of responses, it kind of tells you where students scored? Can we show that?
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome.
Good example. If you're teaching music and you want to record music and share that, you can, maybe even a before and after picture, whatever you want to do. If you're an art teacher and you want to take pictures, there's all kinds of applications here that shows the data of, particularly as we talk about student work. And what we're going to find is that as you show the student work, you're going to really be enthusiastic and excited about what your kids are doing. So this is a great way to personalize your presentation. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is my rubric. This is my pre-assessment and my summative assessment. And I have to admit that because I was making it up, I made sure that everybody did well. Yours may not. There may be kids that went backwards, especially this year, and that's okay. Here I show the individual assignments as it relates to that rubric that I mentioned for my special ed student, Davy Lopes, and for my EL student, Davy Lopes, and my special ed student, Steve Sachs, and the one of my choosing, or really a gifted and talented, Clayton Kershaw. And so this would be actual classroom assignments. Okay. The critical part of those slides is that it demonstrates how your students are improving because you're getting better as a teacher. And so you can tell us about some of the struggles that you had at the beginning of the year, how students weren't quite getting it, or how you were fumbling with the new strategy, or you were really struggling with just getting cameras on, or establishing norms in a long distance environment, or whatever it is that you want to share with us. But show us the before picture and show us that after picture of how you've grown through the lens of student outcomes. Okay, and so this is kind of a summary of what we just talked about. What were the results? 85% of my students will improve. Well, in fact, 94% of my students improved, 25% on the summative assessment. Okay, whoops. So we wrote the results here. Then I want you to refer to the continuum, particularly for the standard that you identified in your ILP and wrote at the beginning of the presentation. Now you'll notice here that all it says is emerging to integrating. What I want to point out here is that your presentation shouldn't be read to us. Your presentation should be your notes, and you're giving us your narrative or story based on what we see on the screen. So if I were presenting today, I would tell you why I believe I am now integrating as it relates to standard 1.5, okay? Please don't just write 1.5 emerging to exploring or whatever, and then move on to the next slide. Give us an explanation of why you believe this is true. And this might be a time where you could jot down other also improved on, but were not part of your ILP. And those necessarily don't need to be explained. What we really want to hear about is the standard that you identified in your ILP. If you read through carefully the CSTPs, you're going to find that there's a lot of overlap between the standards. And so there's a lot of what we would call cross-pollinating. And so even if you show growth in 1.5, you may have also grown in 3.2, for instance. Go ahead and jot that down. You're going to be doing the continuum one last time next month. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to put that in the classroom as an assignment. So what you'll need to do is go back and grab your continuum, click File, make a copy, and then update it one last time. Use a different color and highlight where you're at on the continuum, and then submit that into the classroom. I know that's a harder assignment because it takes about 2 hours to do, but it's critical that you do that so that it shows the growth over time. If you're a second year or ECO, this will be the last time you have to do it. Okay. And then I remember a long time ago when I had hair and I had to buy shampoo, the directions on the bottle said wash, rinse, and repeat. And that's exactly what we're going to do here for standard number 2. We are just going to repeat the same format that we went through with goal number 1. But there is a little bit of a caveat, and I want to explain. In a moment, you're going to see that, particularly on my pathways, on the first pathway in standard 1, I included 5. In my sample that I'm going to show you in a few minutes, it only has 3. And I'll refer you back to the context. I remember I told you that I was a youth pastor for a number of years before I became a teacher. And so classroom management wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. I pretty much had a grip on how to control the classroom. And so for me, as I did this sample inquiry, one goal was major and one goal was minor. If you find that that's the case for you, that's perfectly acceptable. On the other hand, you may find that both goals were equally important to you, and that also is acceptable. So I wanted to give you that freedom to think, gosh, you know, one goal really moved the needle and the other one, yeah, it was okay. Or maybe they both really rocked your world, and either way is fine. All right, goal number 2. So once again, we write the standard, the element, and the goal in past tense. And then we go back to the pathways. One of the things that my sample should have done is, whoops, I should have eliminated these brackets right here. They don't belong anymore. So we'll edit that kind of live. And away we go. So the brackets don't need to be in your template. I'm not going to dock you if you forget 1 or 2 or something like that. It's not how it looks, it's the content, but I would encourage you to delete those brackets as you fill them in. Here we see that I have only 3 pathways as related to that goal. And as I mentioned, because for me, it was not as a bigger influence on my teaching practice as goal number 1 was. All right, what did I learn about my teaching? So once again, we make a list. Remember, on the first one, there were 8. On this one, there are 6. Just tell us what you learned about your teaching as you went through your pathways. Here, the outcome is similar to the first outcome. And so let me make this clear as well. It's very possible that you have chosen the same data for both goals. That is okay. You may have also chosen to use 2 different sets of data. That is also okay. The question is, well, what do I do? How do I choose? What we want you to do is tell us what makes sense to you. What really demonstrated that you grew as a teacher, okay? And so, Hamila, that might be, for instance, an opportunity for editing to look at the second outcome and go, this just doesn't make sense, but the first one makes a whole lot of sense. So that might be an edit that you do where you copy and paste the first outcome into the second goal as well. And that's perfectly acceptable. All right. How did I obtain data? Once again, I had a pre and a summative assessment, and I picked my 3 focus students. My data looks a little different, and this time I examined every assignment for all of the kids in the class and laid it out in a bar graph. And then I showed you the focus for my 3 focus students, my EL student, my special ed student, and my one of my choosing, in this case, a gifted and talented student. Did I meet my goal? Utilizing Kagan strategies, 85% of my students improved 25% from the fall pre-assessment to the post-assessment. So yes, I met my goal. And then once again, I want you to go back to the continuum and identify the standard that you wrote for your goal 2 and tell us how did you grow. And once again, I'll remind you, don't just simply write it. What we want you to do is explain it. Okay, any questions so far? All right, I can see some of you nodding off. I don't mean to labor this point, but this is pretty important. But I understand it's kind of a dry presentation. I get it. All right, last 2 slides. The last 2 slides. In summary, I really want you to finish this sentence. And I want you to write it as a sentence, and then you can explain it in your presentation. But I want you to say, I'm a better teacher now because. I'm a better teacher now because I understand the underlying reasoning for why my students behave as they do. I have a better understanding of how to implement critical thinking skills and strategies into my teaching lessons. Tell us why you believe that you are a better teacher today than in August. And then we want you to continue with the growth mindset. How are you planning on getting better? So we want you to reflect on your continued growth beyond this year. What are you planning on doing this summer? Are you going to attend a seminar? Are you going to read a book? Are you going to do some research? Are you going to look at strategies for how to do a hybrid class? What are you going to do this summer to get better? And what are you going to do next year? And what are you going to do 5 years from now? Okay. So maybe this is the first time you've ever thought about, oh gosh, where am I going to be like in 5 years? So we want you to challenge you a little bit and think, how do I maintain this growth mindset? And that will be your last slide. Any questions?
I have a question about evidence presented in your presentation.
Okay.
Does your evidence in your presentation have to be the same evidence that you had in your journals?
The pre and post, pre and summative assessments are probably not in your journals. So there's one example of where you would grab something that's not in your journal.
Okay.
But beyond that, it probably should be very closely tied to your journals. That's where all your information is.
Okay.
There is a request in the chat that you upload this video as well to the classroom after we're finished.
Okay. I can do that. It's hard to do, so be patient. Among other things, YouTube likes to sort of review plagiarism, but I would think that by tomorrow afternoon, it could be up in the classroom. All right, I miss seeing y'all in person and high-fiving y'all and giving you some chocolate and sodas and visiting with you. And this is the best we can do this year. I miss y'all, but I want you to have a wonderful spring break. I think most of you are getting break next week. Enjoy your time off, and we're looking forward to reviewing your videos and getting excited about all the growth that you have experienced. Just a reminder, if you would sign in if you haven't, so that we can know who attended tonight's session. And then if anyone didn't get the chance to come, we can make sure that they're aware of the video and have an opportunity to see this. So with that, and with no more questions, I bid you a farewell. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.